Hello, everyone. Last day of Unit 2. We're going to talk briefly about sleep. If only this was an actual lesson where we got to sleep, that would be lovely. But we're going to talk about the importance of sleep and then how our sleep cycles work. All right. So let's review real quick. We talked a lot about the nervous system, but I had mentioned before that our body has two main communication networks. We focus mainly on the nervous system in psychology, but we also have a whole other communication network going on in our body, which is the endocrine system. And I did mention the endocrine system in that it's tied in with the hypothalamus. Because remember, we talked about the hypothalamus's function as a thermometer or thermostat for the body, and that it looks at things like hunger and thirst and sleep and all those different needs that we have, and works in conjunction with the endocrine system to balance us out and keep us at homeostasis. So if we see that we're hungry, for example, it's going to go over to its little buddy, the pituitary gland right next door to it, and say, "Hey, we need to balance out. We're hungry, so you need to send some hormones to help balance us back out and let us know we're hungry." So that also works for sleep too. We're gonna see. But just to recap, so endocrine system is our chemical messenger system, and this communicates through hormones rather than neurotransmitters and neurons like the nervous system. The pituitary gland, there's several glands you'll see throughout the endocrine system. The endocrine system is kind of made up of a series of many glands, like the thyroid gland, the pineal gland, etc. Um, but the pituitary gland is the one that's in charge of the whole kind of system. And again, it's located conveniently next to the hypothalamus. So when the hypothalamus sees that something is out of whack, whether it be hunger, thirst, sleep, whatever, it's going to tell it to produce some hormones to help balance us out and maybe secrete things from certain glands all over the body that'll help us out. Also helps influence growth and things like that, right? Hormones we talk about as we're like developing. So now let's talk about this in terms of sleep. So we have something called a circadian rhythm, and this is our body's kind of internal biological clock. And it's what helps us kind of feel sleepy at night and awake during the day and things like that. It's like what's directing our 24-hour sleep wake cycle. Um, and again, that's maybe why you might feel jet lagged if you're like, staying up all night and going to a different country and adjusting. Um, but going back to the endocrine system and the hypothalamus and pituitary gland and all that, within the hypothalamus, the body's thermostat part of the brain, is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this is specifically the part of the brain that controls our circadian rhythms. So it's what tells the endocrine system um, as we get to nighttime to say, hey, adjust our melatonin levels. It's time to make us sleepy. Time to make us sleepy. And if it's more in the daytime, morning, we're getting ready, right? It's going to again communicate to the endocrine system. All right, time to get up. Let's wake up. Um, so again, it's all in connection here that it's helping us regulate our body, telling us when to be sleepy, when to be awake, etc. All right, here's a good image that shows this kind of biological circadian rhythm, internal clock, and all the things that goes on with it. So it's not just, oh, we're awake, we're sleepy. We're looking at all the things that are going on as a result. So let's look here. Okay. So let's say this is like 7 in the morning. So we see that as it gets towards morning and the sun goes up, melatonin secretion stops. Um, we have more testosterone secretion. Then we get to highest level of alertness at 10 a.m. We're really coordinated as it gets later on. Then we see it's getting late. So now we're going to have melatonin secretion start. We're going to get into deep sleep. Our body temperature is going to lower, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So you see all these things are being controlled in that suprachiasmatic nucleus and the hypothalamus, helping us out with these circadian rhythms that are balancing our body out and helping us stay in that kind of 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. Now we're going to look at what like a one night sleep cycle looks like in the parts that make it up. So we're gonna look at there's several stages of sleep. There's non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, and then REM sleep. But we're gonna see that it's not just like we go through this once in a night. Um, a human actually goes through about 4 to 5 sleep cycles per night. Um, so it's not like we're progressively falling into deeper and deeper sleep and then wake up. It's actually more like we're like deep, then light, then deep. It's kind of rotating back and forth. It's interesting. So we'll see here there's varying levels of deepness of sleep. So it might go like 1, 2, 3, 2. It's not might not be completely chronological. It's interesting. A typical sleep cycle is actually 90 minutes long. Right? Like I said, we're going to go through several, depending on how much we sleep. We're going to go through several sleep cycles in one nights of sleep. So let's go through each of these specific stages more in depth. So we start in which will first are wake waves. So we're going to look at how these are showing up in terms of brain waves and what the activity of the brain is showing. So let's take a look here. When we are awake, we have pretty slow brain waves, but there's a good amount of activity because we are awake, so it's going to be tightly bound together. So these are waking alpha waves and waking beta waves. So again, you see um, they're not real big and spread out. They're pretty tightly bound together. And that's because, you're awake, so there's more activity going on. Now, our first stage going into sleep is non-REM 1. You will always start with this just because it is the one that kind of gets you into sleep. So this is where you have slowed breathing, irregular brain waves. You might feel hallucinations or that sense of like you're falling, when you're kind of like, and like wake up a little bit. Or at least kind of, I know when I'm like kind of like dozing off at my like computer or reading or something. So we see this represented here. Right, so it's still like you're still kind of awake, kind of asleep, so it's still more tightly bound like this waking alpha waves. But again, it's starting to kind of loosen up and become less tight, which shows that we're again getting a little bit ready for sleep. Then non-REM 2, so this is where you're clearly asleep. Um, it's not your deepest sleep, but you're pretty clearly asleep, and this is where things called sleep spindles happen, which you can just associate with non-REM 2 sleep. So these are where you have like, you're sleeping, so it's more of like deeper, more spread out waves. But then you have these random bursts of brain activity going on during this part, and it looks like this little sleep spindle, right? So it's like you're kind of asleep, and then you have random bursts of brain activity where it gets really close together. Then we have non-REM 3, and this is where you're in a more deeper sleep, and slow delta waves appear. I remember like delta, I'm thinking kind of like slow, slow, slow. So we see here non-REM 3. Look at this. They're very slow, right? You're in a deep sleep. They're really spread out. So there's not a lot of brain activity. And this is possible during this time for things like sleepwalking, talking, night terrors, and bedwetting and all that to occur during this stage because it's a deeper sleep. But then we have something really interesting. So we are going to rotate back and forth a little bit, right? You might go back to like non-REM 2, but then you're going to enter REM sleep. And this is where it's kind of the most important of the stages to know because a lot of interesting things happen here. So REM, we see all of these are categorized as non-REM, and this one's REM. So REM is clearly the most important one to know because everyone's, naming themselves after REM. So REM stands for rapid eye movement sleep. And that's exactly what's happening here is you're in a really, really deep sleep actually, but at the same time, there's all these things going on that seem like you're not in a deep sleep. So if you look at someone's eyes, like obviously you probably sleep with your eyes closed, but if you were to look at someone's eyes during REM sleep, they're like darting back and forth, like they're active, rapid eye movement. This is where you're dreaming. So this is again a deep sleep where you're dreaming. Your heart rate though, so it's very different than these other deep sleeps of like non-REM 3 because non-REM 3 has delta waves where it's like a deep sleep, right? I think delta deep sleep. But we see REM looks very much like an awake wave. So it's very weird in that you're in, and that's why they call it this kind of paradoxical sleep, in that you're in a really deep sleep, but it's very much like you're awake in terms of brain waves. And your heart rate's up, your breathing's up, your eyes are racing. Like it seems it's very paradoxical because you're like basically awake, but you're in a really deep sleep. Sometimes the body even becomes like paralyzed because you're in such a deep sleep. So pretty interesting. Last little thing, talking about like Freud comes up as a weird dude, like I said, with psychoanalysis. But one thing to know about his, again, we don't, again, most of this isn't necessarily true, but this is just what he thought. Um, this is his dream theory. So we know that, again, in the psychodynamic perspective, those key words are all about the unconscious, saying that our behavior is directed by unconscious needs and desires and repressed memories that are kind of floating around that haven't been addressed that are causing us to like act in certain ways. So he's here saying that in dreams we have things that we're aware of, but then also things that are kind of unconscious that are telling us what we truly want and desire. So he says first there's manifest content. And he said that this is the censored version of what we actually remember from a dream. So he's saying that the stuff we actually do remember, like if you write in a dream journal or remember something, is actually really censored and way more innocent than what the actual dream was. He said the latent content of a dream is actually what the true meaning of a dream was. And this is kind of what you can't remember. Usually it's some kind of unconscious wish or desire, maybe something inappropriate, often something sexual because he's a kind of funky, weird guy. Um, but yeah, it's the latent content. It's the stuff that you don't really pick up on, that you can't remember. But what he's saying is actually the true thing, like the wish or desire from your unconscious that's coming up in your dream. Just in general, though, sleep is really important. It's actually good to know this for the AP exam, but also just in life, this is the one thing that I try to be a healthy person and do good things for myself, but this is one thing that I do not get enough of sleep. Um, but you can just note some of these things that when we are sleep deprived, it really does impact the body holistically. And that we see you have an increased risk of high blood pressure. It's increasing hunger arousing things. So that's could cause you to gain weight, increased inflammation of the joints, diminished attention focus, memory consolidation, increased risk of depression, right? None good things. And I know that most of us don't get enough sleep. So maybe this is a little encouraging. So I should try, but we'll see. And then finally, we'll end with sleep disorders to know for AP. And you're probably pretty aware of some of these. So, insomnia is when you can't fall asleep, you have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. Narcolepsy is the opposite. It's kind of you keep falling asleep out of nowhere, sudden attacks of sleepiness, and you can go right into REM sleep at any moment. And then sleep apnea is when you kind of stop breathing during sleep, which is dangerous. And like I said, night terrors, like the really extreme, terrible dreams, where it becomes like problematic to your life, are happening in non-REM 3. So there you have it. That's all you got to know about sleep. Hopefully you can sleep well tonight before your test.